very first story, President John Dramani Mahama has delivered a forceful address at the 80th United Nations General Assembly, warning that the world is entering a perilous era defined by rising nationalism, rampant disinformation, and the erosion of multilateral cooperation. In a pointed critique of recent global developments, President Mahama condemned what he described as a growing disregard for international norms, highlighting the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He described the situation as a collective punishment of innocent Palestinians and criticized the denial of visas to President Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian delegation, calling it a direct affront to the founding principles of the United Nations. Reaffirming Ghana's unwavering support for two-state solutions, President Mahama stressed that peace and justice in the Middle East remain essential for global stability.
Madam President, these are dangerous times. Our world is currently experiencing a rise in nationalism and economic instability. There's a general breakdown of multilateralism. Various acts of aggression have been committed against the sovereignty of others, and nations are attempting to circumvent the very safeguards that were put in place to prevent large-scale global conflict. These conditions are all too similar to the ones that led to the League of Nations' failure in fulfilling its mandate. The denial of visas to President Abbas and the Palestinian delegation sets a bad precedent and should be deeply worrying to all member nations of the United Nations. Ghana recognized the state of Palestine in 1988 and supported a two-state solution to the conflict since then. And I say, contrary to the claims of some, a two-state solution would not be a reward for Hamas. It would rather be a reprieve for the hundreds of thousands of innocent women and children and people who are facing collective punishment and forced starvation for no reason other than the fact that they are Palestinian. For nearly 2 years and for the fear of reprisals, we here in this General Assembly have been playing hide and seek with language to find the right words to help us avoid or excuse what we all know is taking place in Gaza. But here's the thing, it doesn't matter what you call it. If it looks like a duck, it swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, well, then it must be a duck. The crimes in Gaza must stop. The crimes in Gaza must stop. Madam President, I also want to draw particular attention to the conflict in Sudan, which this body has described as the world's largest humanitarian crisis. 12 million people have had to flee their homes. And when we speak of migration, we refer to the 12 million new Sudanese refugees, whom we as a global community should be willing to assist in much the same way that many member nations readily assisted new refugees coming out of Ukraine. Let's dispense with the euphemisms and dog whistles and speak frankly. It is not a mystery that when leaders of Western nations complain of their migration problems, they are often referring to immigrants from the global south. But many of those immigrants are climate refugees. And interestingly, the global north emits 75% more greenhouse gases than the global south. However, the effects of climate change are more severe in the global south because we lack the resources to address them effectively. And so when the desert encroaches on our villages and towns and they become unlivable, we are forced to flee. Wasan a Somali-born prophet, a Somali-British poet born in Kenya to Somalian refugee parents, was London's first youth poet laureate. She writes in her poem titled Home. And it says, you have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under trains beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck feeding on newspaper unless the miles traveled mean something more than just a journey. Madam President, we cannot normalize cruelty. We cannot normalize hatred. We cannot normalize xenophobia and racism. If we're going to tell a story, let's not tell its slant. Let's tell all the truth. When we speak of migrants, we speak of Mami Ewusi Mensah Frimpong, a judge on the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California. She's the first black female judge on any of California's 4 federal district courts. She was born here in America to immigrant parents from Ghana. We speak of Peter Bosman, a medical doctor in Ghana who moved to the town of Piran in Slovenia in the 1980s and later became the first black mayor of Piran, the first black mayor in Slovenia and in the whole of Eastern Europe. We speak of T. Michael, the iconic Ghanaian Norwegian artist and designer. And of course, we speak of the late Kofi Annan, former United Nations Secretary General. Former United Nations Secretary General and Nobel Peace Prize recipient who was born in Ghana but spent his adulthood in various places in America and Europe. These are people who have brought great distinction to the countries that they decided to call home. Just as the migrants and the children of migrants before them did, I dare say these are not invaders. These are not criminals. Madam President, the slave trade must be recognized as the greatest crime against humanity. As the African champion on reparations, Ghana intends to introduce a motion in this August body to that effect. More than 12.5 million Africans were forcibly taken against their will and transported to create wealth for the powerful Western nations. We must demand reparations for the enslavement of our people and the colonization of our land that resulted in the theft of our natural resources, as well as the looting of artifacts and other items of cultural heritage that have yet to be returned in total. We recognize the value of our land and the value of our lives, as did our colonizers, as well as the governments that happily paid reparations to former slave owners as compensation for the loss of their property in quotes. And that property for which they received compensation was paid referred to enslaved people who had been freed. Madam President, an increasingly insecure world is witnessing upward spending on defense budgets of bilateral partners and steep cuts in official development assistance. Since July 2024, it is estimated that there has been a 40% drop in humanitarian aid globally. In this era of global uncertainty, Africa must exercise sovereignty over its natural resources to raise the necessary funds to ensure the well-being of its citizens. The days of parceling out vast concession areas to foreign interests for exploitation must come to an end. We'll continue to welcome foreign investment, but we must negotiate better for a bigger share of the natural resources that belong to us. And we must insist on value addition to these resources. We're tired of the continued image of poverty-stricken, disease-ridden rural communities living at the periphery of huge foreign-controlled natural resource concession areas. We're tired of having people extract the most they can from us and in return offer us the very least by way of respect, consideration, and dignity. We're tired of not being represented in ways that reveal the richness and complexity of our history or acknowledge all that we have overcome to arrive here in this liminal space of untold possibilities. Allow me to echo the Indian-American writer Arundhati Roy, who wrote, "Another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing." I want to add that for the sake of Africa, and quite selfishly for the sake of my 18-year-old daughter, I hope that this new world that is arriving is a place of safety and equality for women and girls. To succeed, we must empower everyone, including women and girls, to reach their full potential. In closing, Madam President, I'd like to congratulate you on your election to preside over this historic 80th General Assembly and on being the fifth woman to hold this distinction. I'd also like to congratulate Her Excellency Nana Jane Opoku-Agyeman on being the first woman Vice President of Ghana. Now every Ghanaian girl knows the heights to which she can ascend. Words matter, but issues of representation matter even more, which is why Ghana looks forward to the appointment of a woman as Secretary General of this organization in the near future.
So that's His Excellency President John Dramani Mahama is delivering that beautiful and powerful speech at the 80th edition of the United Nations General Assembly, UN General Assembly there. So, I mean, he talked about quite a number of things. So we want to have an assessment of 80 years on what has been the impact on global economy, Africa, and Ghana at large. I've been joined on the phone by international diplomatic consultant Farouk Wahab. Wahab, good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time on 505.
Good evening, sir.
President John Dramani Mahama talked about a number of things, but I mean, first of all, before we get into the breakdown of the issues he discussed, first of all, 80 years on, United Nations General Assembly, would you say Africa, Ghana has been a beneficial of these successive congresses that we've held in the past?
Yes, I'm listening.
I'm asking, what is your general impression or your assessment of 80 years on of the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, I mean, one would say that yes, they've achieved a lot of, let me call it some height. But then it has grown to become more or less gradually and increasingly a weaker organization as it used to be before, comparatively. The reason being that some bigger nations, more or less, they've started and began swallowing UN. UN had become just, let me call it, an existing tool, an organization ordinarily, which has put the whole world together. Undoubtedly, they have achieved some goals, some aims, but greatly, I think the organization 80 years stresses very, 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 very bad situation as compared to when, since its inception or some 20 years ago. Reason being that some countries disrespect the UN with impunity, and the UN is biteless, they can't bite. A lot of countries have taken unilateral decisions and went their way and did a lot of things UN could not until now. And then UN itself is also meddled itself with selective, call it, either selective justices or certain countries are pampered babies, which are used either as cash cow for the UN itself, or some countries are being taken as UN's pampered kids, whereas others are completely are not in the books of the UN. So if you look at it from that angle, you put it up in summary form, I would say that UN has not lived to the expectations. 80 years, one would have seen the maturity of a man born 80 years, the sense and then also the wisdom. So if at 80 years, if not sickness, and the father or a man in 80 years right now, you realize that maybe his thinking abilities, everything becomes, that is compared to the human structure in human body and mental retardedness. So let's look at an organization which increasingly are developing methods, creating wild and extra more commissions, creating offices, commission upon commission. UN used to have umbrella groups, about 6. The UNICEF, the UNHCR, the FAO, the UNDP, the major ones. But now that one would say that they have gotten a lot of umbrella groups that are supporting the UN, that should make the work more efficient. Look at the Medicine Sans Frontières, look at a whole lot of international organizations that are directly working on the UN. That is not the UN that one should be seeing. This is not a UN that all over the world. There's fight everywhere, scattered everywhere. So for me, in summary, UN 80 years, it's weaker than 50 years ago, weaker than 20 years ago, increasingly depleting its strength, and then its authority on countries. And very soon, in the next 5-10 years, if it goes like this, I'll be very much afraid if even the United Nations General Assembly, one is called, and any country will respond. Because countries feel that they are isolated, some are assisted, some are isolated. So 80 years of UN, much as they've achieved some aim, greater, they haven't done anything to me. My estimation.
I see. President Mahama condemned the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the denial of visas to Palestinian leaders. How significant is this constructive criticism coming from an African head of state, especially on the UN stage?
You see, if I were to be on the podium, ideally I was invited to go with the Vanuatu delegation. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it. Okay. Every year I go on the strength of Vanuatu, all the Pacific nations, and I go into the chamber. Ideally, I would have given my president a thumbs up, right? Why? Ghana's position with the UN has been very consistent. We've been very consistent on enhancing global peace and security for sustainable and then what? Sustainable security for the world and inclusive development. That has been the Ghana's position.
Okay.
Ghana's position had also been a global fighter and support of what? A climate and all that. But then back to a country where he made mention specifically humanitarian crisis in two notable countries. One, Darfur, Sudan, and then two, the Palestine. The president couldn't have made that opportunity without setting the stage. And that is what I expected when the Ghanaian president mounts the stage. These are some of the issues that we'll be dealing with. Not to mix yourself up into world politics. As happened, the last UN General Assembly attended by the former president, His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, where he declared and made a statement which actually didn't receive any applause, that Ukraine and Russia, every bomb that hit on Ukraine target affects the pocket of Africans.
Okay.
But he didn't do the reverse entry that any Ukrainian bomb that hits on target of Russia also increases or enriches the African's pocket. So you look at the dynamics. You don't go out. The president was very direct on the African issue. And the African issue, why he worked and made catastrophic humanitarian situation over Palestine, for instance. He first mentioned of Sudan. Then he brought in Palestine because Palestinian state was recognized by the African Union. Yeah. And for that matter, Ghana was the strength behind all this. And we gave Yasser Arafat an honorary member of the African Union, whereas it has no other organization. So ideally, it is incumbent on the neck of every Ghanaian president to make mention of anything. Let us not forget, since the inception of UN, and since Ghana joined the UN in 1957, we've had the chance to be members on the UN Security Council. We've been there between 1962-63. We were a member for 2 years. We've been there in 1986-87, 2006 and 2007. And then lastly was 2002, 2023, 2022. Look at when Ghana, Madam Ayoko, or His Excellency, the President of the Republic, made mention of two-state solution for, what's the name, Palestine and then Israel. Israeli ambassador in Ghana here warned Ghana president over utterances, as he refers it. Yeah. Which is not acceptable. But I think President Mahama, he has done me a great job and he has really posited Africa on a very respectful listen because most Africans would dare not even touch that dial, especially on the soil of the United States. And for that matter, if the president sets the tone for the African to discuss about it, he is saying that yes, there is selective with regards to the situation. But currently, as we speak, the biggest refugee exodus inland displaced people in Sudan, over 12 million. Look at it from that angle. What has UN done? Virtually nothing. UN is doing nothing about it. No other country is doing about it. But then when there's an issue that bothers in a small country, certain Israel and some other jurisdictions, in the reference of President Mahama, Ukraine, should anybody tell me, post-World War, what is the West and Western world? What are they earning, gaining, getting from Ukraine? But look at the monies and the emphasis that have gone in there. At the end of the day, UN follows up and turns out with the European Union and their direction and their interest. It's a colonialism against Afroism. So if the president is speaking of Afroism, he's being very much on the point that yes, you can be selective, and yes, humanitarian, he positioned it, and that is the Ghana stand. Whoever takes it, any of the Western, and I know Israel ambassador will just counter or make a comment of it. We are waiting. And President has really made it very clear. And to me, among all all the podiums that he has lectured on, the World Security in Munich this year, that is in somewhere in February, in March, I was at the podium. We happened to be in the same hotel with His Excellency the President. So we attended. We were over there, he delivered. But there is a catch. Telling the Western leaders on the face, something most African leaders will not do.
Yeah.
That you cannot do that. You can't leave Sudan and then not only be interested in Ukraine. You can't leave Palestine and be interested in Ukraine. I think the subject was well mentioned, and I think it was well delivered, and he delivered on point.
I see.
That shows the maturity level of our president.
I agree. From where I sit as a journalist, President Mahama's speech seemed to signal a more assertive African stance on global justice and equity issues. If so, how might that reshape global diplomacy, for that matter, the country called Ghana?
Well, let me tell you for fact, some of us we've been transmission translator for UN itself as a body for longer years. We've been most of all these year missions. We've worked with Mrs. Ogata, Ms. Annan, and Okofian and all that. So we do have an experience about how the UN itself as a body operates. Now, it's a speech well delivered. Whether the Europeans or the Western leaders call it the global power, whether they see it, it is in that podium, the Africans, the Asian Caucasus, the Caribbean Caucasus, the Pacific, and the entire ACP member country, each one of them will rise and clap. Are you getting me? The Europeans, fine. The non-aligned ones or the liberal governments within Europe, not the Christian Democrats or the far-right government, they would all clap. But that should be initiated. Put that one into commitment. That initiative being put into commitment, that is what's the question mark. Because Guterres himself, they don't listen to him. Americans don't listen to Guterres. UK, British don't listen to him to some extent. Even imagine a global power, no other country like a superpower like France. I believe you've heard how the French President Macron was being treated on the streets of New York, like any ordinary, ordinary person, with disrespect and impunity. So in such messages, while you can drum home, as the president has done it, but shaping or changing the global or have any dynamics to do with the global politics or the shape of direction of the UN, at the end of the day, I can still tell you that in as much as we have only 6 permanent Security Council members, and then 3 of them strongly they are having a veto power to veto anything, and then they are also having the right, also maltreating countries that they feel they can, and also taking unilateral decisions against the wish and the will of the UN. It continues to be as such. Yes, he has done well. The Africans must unite together strongly once more and present herself on the global platform, interface with the UN, which to me, when you meet them or you see them at the podium, the power is a bit less. Why? But we having the biggest continental level in terms of participation and the 183, 190 countries with flags. The bloc in Africa, 56 nations are in there, 54 solid members, except St. Anthony and some few countries that haven't got the magnitude to be members of the UN. Even with that, they recognize some of the UN charter and resolutions, etc. But a membership of 54, how is the size of the whole Europe? 48 members, the whole Europe. How many Asia? How many does the Caribbean and etc. bring on board? Australia, the Oceania. How many members do they bring on board? We are the strongest. So if it comes to decision, I've mentioned that the UN herself as a body is very biased, without any reservation, without anything. Because one, block the whole Africa. Something Gaddafi has ever raised it on the podium. Nelson Mandela has ever raised it before. Kwame Nkrumah then at that time raised it. And then some few Pan-Africanists have raised it. Look, we are not members, we don't have a permanent member with the UN Security Council. Who are the permanent with the United States, the United Kingdom, and then the France, the China, the Russia, and then I think now the India. So if these are permanent, where is the African continent represented? We only called him as an honorary member for 1 year or 2 years, and even with that, when we have the chance to chair the Security Council, none of our message is being taken. Even at the time Mr. Kofi Annan, no African had the chance to be what? To be a security member. Whereas we have Boutros Ghali, Mr. Kofi Annan succeeding one after another, all African UN Secretary General. We couldn't be present. So what I'm saying is that there should be a strong proposal for the entire continent to say that, look, we are also a superpower when you put us one in a block. So Africa, we don't need to be called 2 years. That Ghana comes 2 years, you come, you bring Gabon. And cleverly what they do, anytime they will select an African party, African country to be part of a temporary, call it an honorary membership or temporary member of the UN Security Council, they normally will pledge that African country against another when they are voting. The one that Ghana won 2022, Ghana will start against Gabon, Albania, and Brazil. Look at how they did it. They pick Europe, they pick South America, and then they pick 2 Africans, fight with each other. But it doesn't work. So Africa must have a confrontational stand and tell the UN that we are also 56. We don't want any individual country. We represent as one bloc. Africa must have a permanency with the UN Security Council.
I see.
When it happens like that, then we'll be able to fight for Sudan. We'll be able to fight for Congo. We'll be able to fight for individual countries because we can also take decisions on the table of the Council of the Security. But in a situation where they meet, and it's always west-west, France, America, and UK decision is what is taken. French, the Chinese, and the Russians, they cannot veto anything. So it just go on the right side, and all the time Africans left off hook, and we are left just alone. In my view, messages like that from President Mahama should rather ignite the OAU, that is the African Union, for them to do more and have one unified state, devoid of any Western influences, and present African continent as one member. If we happen to be there, there would be a lot of things that could be solved as far as the UN Security Council and the world policy and the world order as well as concerned.